All right, so if we're looking at carbohydrate digestion, we're going to start with the mouth. So what nutrient, what carbohydrate can be digested in the mouth? Starch, right? So, and the enzyme that digests starch is salivary amylase. So in the mouth, we start with salivary amylase. And we can think about salivary amylase. Its purpose is to add water to a starch molecule and break apart some of those glucoses, right? Because starch is just a long chain of glucose. Anything happen in the esophagus? Nope, nothing happens in the esophagus. So now we're in the stomach. What happens in the stomach? So there are enzymes in the stomach, but not for carbohydrates. So salivary amylase, though, is deactivated in the stomach because of the hydrochloric acid. So salivary amylase is deactivated.
The way I was taught this, Laura, is that salivary amylase is a base, not an acid. So it's a base in the mouth. And that's why the acid deactivates it.
Right, so salivary amylase is a protein that functions better in a neutral or more basic environment. Yep, so you can think about it as a protein. So since the amylase is a protein, it's going to be digested just like all the other proteins in the stomach too.
Amylase is a protein.
All the enzymes are proteins.
Okay.
Yeah. And so that's why when we talk about proteins function in the body, we can say that one of its functions is regulation, because with protein, it acts as enzymes, and enzymes regulate, right? They're regulators. Okay, so then in the small intestine, because we haven't finished digesting starch, pancreatic amylase is secreted into the small intestine and continues to digest starch, okay? So right now, all we've digested is starch, right? We can't digest fiber. It keeps going through. We can't digest lactose or maltose or sucrose until we hit a little bit lower in the small intestine, because the brush border enzymes do that, right? And then what are those enzymes called to finish off the digestion that come in the brush border? They digest the disaccharides. So pancreatic amylase finishes digesting the starch, and that comes from the pancreas. And then there are three, the disaccharadases that are on the brush border. So the aces digest the oses. Sucrase, maltase, and lactase. Good. So once those finish digesting,
That's in the small intestine?
That's in the small intestine. And those are made right in the brush border of the small intestine. So those are actually made in the small intestine. They're not made in the pancreas like the pancreatic amylase. So then we're only left with glucose, fructose, and galactose. And glucose, fructose, and galactose are then absorbed in the villi, right, into the mucosal cell, and they travel through the portal vein to the liver. And then in the liver, the fructose and the galactose are both converted into glucose. Okay, so all they need to do, because all of their molecular formulas are C6H12O6, the only thing that really has to happen is they just need to kind of shift their shape a little bit. So there are enzymes in the liver that allow that to happen. Next, glucose is released into the blood. When blood glucose increases, the pancreas secretes insulin, and the insulin has the key to the cells, right? So the insulin has that key to the cells. It helps to unlock the door of the cells. Or you can say that cells have insulin receptors. That would be how you say it scientifically, that the insulin hooks onto a receptor on the cell and allows glucose to go in. So you can also think about that as like insulin unlocks the door of the cell and then glucose can transport into the cell. So insulin's our little key. It unlocks the cell door and allows glucose in. And that, Kailani, that is what you had asked, like doesn't glucose get broken down into ATP? That's the next part of the story. So glucose, once in the cell, is then converted to energy, right, to ATP or to energy, using either anaerobic metabolism. And what does anaerobic metabolism mean? Yeah, so that you could also call that glycolysis, and that's without oxygen, right? Glucose, out of glucose and fat and protein, glucose is the only molecule that can be used in anaerobic metabolism that we consume, right? Or it can be used in aerobic metabolism, and what does that mean? With oxygen, and that's the Krebs cycle followed by the electron transport chain, okay? And that's what we're going to get into next in class, all right? And we're going to talk about healthy metabolism versus, what happens with low-carb diets and what metabolism looks like if you're not eating carbohydrates, right? And just to bring it kind of one step further, before we get to metabolism, can anybody tell me what happens in type 1 diabetes? Because we can't get to metabolism with type 1 diabetes if it's uncontrolled. What happens there?
There's no, or virtually no, insulin production because the beta cells in the pancreas have been destroyed, and therefore the blood doesn't have, the sugars don't have the key to get into the cell.
Yeah, exactly. So the pancreas beta cells have been destroyed. Beta cells make insulin. Therefore, you can't make insulin. Therefore, there's no key. Without a key, you can't open the door, right? I'm sure we've all lost our car keys at one point or the other, and you definitely can't open the door until you get some help, right? So, we need that external help with type 1 diabetes. You just need to give yourself external insulin through an insulin pump or an insulin shot, and then you can start getting that glucose into the cells to perform metabolism. In type 2 diabetes, it's the lock, right? The lock is fuzzy, so that's insensitive cells, right? So if you have pre-diabetes or you're insulin resistant, that means that the cells are not responding to the presence of insulin in the blood, and so that would lead to the same thing. Glucose can't get into the cells and you can't perform metabolism, right? And as a result, glucose is going to keep building up in the blood, causing all sorts of problems, both in the large blood vessels and in the small blood vessels, which is why it leads to blindness, to numbness, to amputations, to heart disease, right? So lots of complications with untreated diabetes because you're having so much glucose in the blood, right? But if we control it, then we can get it out of the blood. So that can be helpful there.